This is Colleen Duffy of Devil Doll, and you are listening to the one and only US Modernist Radio.
Mama don't allow no architecture around here. Mama don't allow no architecture around here. Oh, I don't care what Mama don't allow, gonna draw mine modern anyhow. Mama don't allow no architecture around here.
Welcome to US Modernist Radio, where we talk and laugh with people who enjoy, own, create, dream about, preserve, love, and hate modernist architecture, the most exciting and controversial buildings in the world. I'm Tom Guild. Nowhere in the world celebrates modernism better than Modernism Week in Palm Springs, California. Every February, they have a huge architecture and design festival, and for the last 5 years, US Modernist has been there interviewing nearly all of Modernism Week's keynote speakers, plus special guests at the US Modernist compound, aka poolside, at the hip Hotel Skylark in Palm Springs. In our second Modernism Week show on interiors, George Smart meets with two experts on what makes the modernist vibe so wonderfully livable. Sarah Archer is a contributing editor at American Craft Magazine and the author of the Midcentury Kitchen, America's Favorite Room, from Workspace to Dreamscape. She spoke at Modernism Week on the kitchen of tomorrow, space-age design in the high-tech modern home. You thinking the Jetsons? That's exactly right. Laura Ackerman-Shaw established Ackerman Modern and worked with her father, Jerome Ackerman, and Design Within Reach to re-release a collection of iconic Jenev ceramic vessels first produced in 1953, with new pieces produced based on the original plaster molds. By now, I'm an old hand at Mod Week. George took me last year, and I got the hang of it pretty fast. But let me tell you, one of George's genius moves for the folks at the US Modernist compound was to set us all up with special Uber accounts so we can get chauffeured all around town and see the sights. And since Palm Springs loves to serve the martinis during Mod Week, it's kind of nice to know you're safe once you've hit your third or fourth party, and the nice Uber dude or dudette will get you back to the Skylark in one piece.
You know, it's very much like having your own personal driver.
It's wonderful.
It's like limo light, really.
Could you just give me an Uber account for all the time?
I'll work on that, Tom, you know?
Yeah, I bet you will.
Hey, if you are into mid-century modern, Modernism Week is a completely joyous, all-you-can-eat modern festival of mid-century architecture, shopping, martinis, benefit events, architecture documentaries, amazing parties and incredible houses, brilliantly curated exhibits, art, architecture, and much more. For me, I love going to camp. And what camp is the headquarters for Modernism Week. It's a giant white tent. It's actually a couple of tents. There's a main huge one that has a snack bar and a real bar. You can get a coffee or a martini.
That's pretty much. We did not have that when I went to camp.
No, you didn't see that? You just didn't ask for the right thing at the little bar there.
Maybe so.
You can purchase tickets for different events. You can get on one of their wonderful double-decker tour buses that takes you on excursions around town, and you're up on the top level of the bus, so you can see things from a vantage point that you just couldn't do normally in your car. It's pretty fantastic. They also have restrooms there, and they have a special performance lecture space where you can go and listen to speakers from around the world, really, talk about different aspects of mid-century modernism. If you want to go with us in February 2021 and stay at the swanky US Modernist compound, email me at george@usmodernist.org. US Modernist Radio is underwritten by Nichiha.com/USModernist and by Modernist realtor Angela Roll.
In a caper we are kind of making up, Modernist realtor Angela Roll was born in Monte Carlo, the love child of a Brazilian heiress and her Italian driver Sergio. Sent to boarding school in the Alps, she snuck out at night to bartend at the 5-star resort in Vaal, Switzerland. It was there, in the Peter Zumthor designed thermal spa, steaming in the November chill, that she overheard a detailed conversation. It was between Stavros Petikov, a wealthy Russian, planning a modernist Paris hotel, and the famous international architect Jean Nouvel. Inspired, she whipped up a better hotel design on a bar napkin, which she gave to Petikov, and guess what? It won the commission. Nouvel, however, was furious and in his rage turned to a life of crime as Dr. Evil in the Austin Powers movies. Yes, you've seen them, and the resemblance is uncanny. 18 months later at the hotel opening, Nouvel took a cue from the Three Stooges and secretly managed to place hundreds of banana peels in the new hotel rooms. Scores of people were injured, and Angela was taken to court. Taking the Channel to London, she hired a barrister, Eric of Windsor. He successfully fought the charges on appeal. And they got married next year. She moved to America to become a formidable real estate agent with modernist architecture training for buyers and sellers of modernist houses. Angela Roll is your special agent. Reach her at angelaroll.com. That's ROEHL or 919-995-0550.
Thank you, Tom. This is our second Modernism Week show on interiors. If you're not a fan of modernism, it's easy to criticize modernist houses from the street. They do look different. They are often built out of different materials, or they differ from traditional building forms. Critics of modernism, among other Molotov cocktails, say the houses are cold, lacking human warmth. It's a fair observation if you've never been inside one for a few hours, or you've never spent the night in one. Once that visit or overnight happens, however, your opinion may shift. Modernist interiors can be in a range of styles, but what they have in common is a sometimes undefinable wonder and calm. The vibe, if you will, from the bathrooms to the living rooms to the bedrooms, to the domain of my first guest, Sarah Archer, author of the Midcentury Kitchen, America's Favorite Room. She spoke at Modernism Week on the Kitchen of Tomorrow, space-age design in the high-tech modern home. Are you thinking the Jetsons?
Mm-hmm.
Jane, get me off this crazy thing? Rosie the maid? Bingo. Later on, I talk with Laura Ackerman-Shaw, author of Evelyn and Jerome Ackerman, The House That Love Built, who with Design Within Reach brought back iconic Jenev ceramics her parents first produced in 1953. Let's go poolside in Palm Springs.
So how is Toast doing?
Toast is wonderful. He's about 6 pounds and about 6 months old, and he eats like a lumberjack and is getting bigger every day, and he's a delight. Thank you for asking.
What kind of cat?
As far as we know, I mean, he's an orange tabby. He really looks exactly like the emoji, like the little cat emoji. He's sort of creamsicle. He was a rescue. The nice people at Project Meow rescued him as a kitten, and we fostered him. He had a wonderful foster mom who bottle fed him, and we took him home around Thanksgiving of 2019, and he's just great.
Sounds like he might be like a spokescat for something.
It kind of does. Yeah, it's. We named him Toast because he sort of looks like a little loaf of bread.
Yeah.
And he is enormously enthusiastic about all sorts of things. The window and his food and anything that flutters. So, enthusiasm are us at our house right now.
That's a nice segue towards modernism.
Towards modernism. We're enthusiastic about modernism.
Which was really enthusiastic and forward-thinking.
It sure was.
Especially in the, drum roll please, kitchens.
In the kitchen.
In the kitchens. I mean, this was, and you can make various sexist arguments about it, I'm sure, but this was the idea that life was going to be better in the future and easier.
Yep, easier and easier.
And the promise of all this stuff, coming along. When did this really start to roll out in America that the kitchen was going to be the time saver of the family?
In the years following World War I, that's when people started to get municipal gas, water, and electricity. So appliances started to make sense, and companies like GE and Westinghouse started producing commercially available refrigerators and all that stuff. And there were people like Christine Frederick, home economist, Lillian Gilbreth, another one, who started kind of doing experiments and writing treatises about how women could sort of cook and prepare food and clean up more efficiently. So kitchen design gets a big makeover. The logic of the factory is brought to bear, efficiency on the design of the kitchen. And appliances initially in the 20s are sort of marketed with slogans like, I have an invisible servant. Like, a stove with a clock that, times things automatically is going to sort of transform me into kind of a gracious person who can have people over for smart cocktail parties.
Yes.
Because I have this,
Right.
Or the monitor top refrigerator from 1927 is, you can go away for a whole weekend and not worry about your food.
Because this is transiting out of icebox era?
Literally.
Basically?
Or people just having no appliances at all and going to the grocery store every day and having to worry constantly about food going bad and wastage. And so this is a huge change. And what has been remarked by many people, most notably Adrian Forty, who wrote Objects of Desire, is that these appliances were sometimes marketed as though they were substitutes for staff. But really, they were meant to appeal to people who had never had staff in the first place. So it was kind of a way to do a little social climb, that you could kind of go from being very much a do-it-yourselfer to sort of having this more genteel, seamless experience in the kitchen. And then in the decades that followed, there starts to be a real emphasis on saving time and steps and drudgery, because that was the way to preserve your beauty and youth.
Yes.
That was a big concern, especially in the 1930s.
And that extended for a long time.
Absolutely. It was really sort of at its height, the obsession with time saving and labor saving as a way to kind of remain beautiful. And you can see it perfectly illustrated in the Middletons video, that short film, The Middletons at the World's Fair in 1939, that was produced by Westinghouse. And there's...
is that on YouTube?
It is on YouTube.
Okay,
and you can look it up. It's great. And there's a section that's done up sort of almost like a boxing match. There's an announcer, and it's Mrs. Modern versus Mrs. Drudge. And Mrs. Modern has a Westinghouse dishwasher, as one does. And Mrs. Drudge is doing everything by hand.
This is like Goofus and Gallant.
It is literally, it's like so terrible, but it's so funny. And of course, Mrs. Modern wins. And they're judged on 3 criteria: time, the cleanliness of the dishes, both of which Mrs. Modern, of course, wins, and the condition of the contestants. And this is the kind of big prize, that Mrs. Modern looks as fresh as a daisy, whereas Mrs. Drudge is covered with water and it's
covered in soot.
Covered in soot, the horror. And poor Mrs. Drudge, she looks perfectly fine, but it's just they make it up to be sort of like she's, the poor thing is just haggard. This real marketing ethos of, you're at risk as a woman of your man kind of losing interest if you're a drudge.
Right. I mean, there was this whole crazy sexist vibe that twisted
most
through
of it.
this.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's just one step short of, if you don't get this dishwasher,
literally, you're out on the street. Yeah, exactly.
Because your husband's going to run off with his secretary,
who has
like
a dishwasher.
Mad Men's
exactly.
style, right? Yeah,
he's going to leave you for somebody who has all the mod cons.
Yeah,
right? And then after World War II, that's really when the kitchen of tomorrow starts to take hold. There's World's Fairs become a big site, continue to be, for model kitchens, and things like the RCA Whirlpool Miracle Kitchen, which was at the American National Exposition in Moscow in 1959, which had kind of a proto Roomba. There was a little kind of individual vacuum cleaner, which secretly was radio controlled. There was like a guy behind a screen controlling it. But for all the visitors, the Soviet visitors could see, it was like, wow, is this a typical kitchen? And of course it wasn't at all. But they had a very attractive home economist named Anne Anderson, who happened to be the daughter of Ukrainian immigrants and was fluent in Ukrainian. So she was able to speak, up to a point with the Russian visitors. And there were, sleek, like a dishwasher that would kind of roll out on a track and you could kind of see what was going on. A refrigerator that had, sort of an open panel. You could see everything that you had. A little kind of computer desk where you could keep track of all your recipes.
Right, and your grocery list.
And your grocery list, that all important.
Yes.
Calculate all, your budgeting for your marketing. And it was just dazzling.
What were some of the innovations that came along around the 60s? I remember it's not Kelvinator. It was something nader in the name, but it was the disposal.
Oh, the garbage disposal.
The garbage disposal.
Yes.
That was big.
That was huge. That was actually, interestingly, though, not a huge feature of kitchens of the future.
Okay.
The funny thing kitchens of the future tended to be sort of like display kind of to the nth degree. Like it was almost kind of Star Trek, right? And they would make these short films like Design for Dreaming, the one that had from 1956 General Motors, that would have, whisk a woman away to the model kitchen and kind of show how food would simply magically appear.
Is this when Mrs. Drudge is dreaming she's being whisked away?
By a masked man to the Waldorf Astoria to go to Motorama, exactly.
And there's a lot of bodice ripping, I'm sure.
Certainly. There's a lot of, and the Design for Dreaming is fabulous because there's a sequence where she sort of bakes a cake doing minimal effort, and then skips along and kind of appears in a tennis outfit and then appears in a golfing outfit and then a swimsuit, and it's sort of, here's what you can do.
And then finally evening wear for the night out, right?
And then here's the cake and it's all done. So there's this real focus on not having to do anything. Like, here's all the neat stuff you can do with all your free time, because heaven forbid you cook and do all those things and then kind of make time for yourself. It's like, here, now you have permission to play tennis or do whatever.
And foods follow the same thing.
Absolutely.
The prepackaged foods, the hamburger helper type thing.
Frozen food.
Coming out, frozen foods. Stuff. This was to match that lifestyle.
Absolutely, the convenience lifestyle. And kind of interestingly, kitchens of tomorrow tended not to emphasize that kind of stuff. And it could be because they sort of needed to cultivate a continuing sense that everything was difficult. And so you need all of these gadgets. And it's, broadly speaking, for people who were old enough to remember maybe not having electricity or plumbing or a gas stove, maybe the only appliance in their house was a cast iron stove. If you lived long enough to then live in a house with a dishwasher and a stove and a fridge and a freezer, you could be forgiven for thinking, well, gosh, what'll happen in another 30 years? We'll have flying cars, right? So there's the notion that the kitchen was this kind of space age marvel is, when you look at what kitchens were mostly like, sort of in the years prior to World War I, practically not even a discrete room, sometimes just a stove. And kind of a hodgepodge of furniture. So this is the era when countertops are streamlined and uniform at sort of a uniform height, 36 inches, kind of built to fit a typical woman. Things are color coordinated, and borrowing from sort of the ethos of annual styling in the auto industry, because remember, General Motors owns Frigidaire, appliances come out in fashion colors every year. So it's, the 57s, the 58s, all kind of different shades of baby blue or turquoise or pink or what have you.
It was really thrilling time, I recall. and especially then, the Jetsons came along.
Exactly, right.
And they were the kitchen of tomorrow on steroids. You had Rosie the maid, right?
You had the food rack-a-cycle, which was this kind of food dispenser, almost like the automat, that you could punch in things like, they had regular stuff like fried chicken, which somehow, having instant fried chicken sounds pretty great.
Yeah.
And things like flying pizza. But it's all this very mid-century food, like beef stroganoff, it's hilarious. And the idea that it's so fascinating because it's the early 60s, so of course Jane doesn't work.
Right.
Meanwhile, she has a maid and an instant food machine that dispenses all this food. So it's a really funny moment in that it was kind of the sort of kitchen of tomorrow ad absurdum.
Right. And of course, you had some of those same themes in the Flintstones.
Right.
In the Stone era, but they were making futuristic kind of,
isn't it interesting?
Kitchen items.
Absolutely. Because it was mirroring the kind of post-war American dream.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think in the Flintstones, they made little animals do it, like the tortoise would be your kitchen carousel and would spin your food items around for you.
Genius.
And then make some snarky comment at the end of it.
Right, sort of sarcastic comment and then toddle off. Yeah.
Right. That's fascinating.
Yeah.
I know that there are tons now of collectors of this stuff. There's a whole collection community. I'm sure you've interfaced with that.
A little bit. There are people who collect and restore appliances if they're redoing a mid-century house. You can find, just the way that you can find things like aluminum Christmas trees on Etsy and eBay, you can find the Frigidaire Flare, one of the status stoves of the mid-60s. You can find restored stoves really dating as far back as the 20s. There are people who specialize, just like with cars, in perfecting the enamel and making sure a lot of them still work. That's the amazing thing. They don't fall apart. They sort of go out of style.
Yes.
And in fact, they were designed to go out of style. It was planned obsolescence and annual styling. But nothing wrong with a lot of them. They, work perfectly well.
There's a fridge I know of that belonged to my dad that is now residing in a cabin in Virginia.
Wow.
That is from 1963.
Wow.
And it has never shut off.
Right?
It just
keeps going.
You have to defrost it because that's what you had to do in those days.
That's what you had to do back then.
Because you would get these, giant
huge
ice walls
right.
that would build up. That would literally clog a foot across space.
Isn't it unbelievable?
With ice.
Yeah. You have to kind of chip away at it, right?
You would either chip away at it
or just unplug it and kind of,
Yeah, and then you'd have a puddle all over your kitchen because it would leak.
And then sort of have to call someone up and say, oh, you can't come over today because I have to defrost. It's like I have to wash my hair, right? You have to defrost
the fridge. And then I believe in the 70s, people thought, these new blow dryers are kind of interesting.
Right.
Why don't I take my blow dryer
and
to defrost my fridge?
Genius.
And I recall that some people, that did not work out so well because they electrocuted themselves.
That's always a danger. Yeah, that's not.
Yeah.
Which is why the frost-free fridge was such an innovation.
Okay.
In the, I think it was the late 70s, 80s.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That came along.
Yeah.
So what's next for appliances, do you think?
That's a great question. I think one of the things I talk about is that the kitchen of tomorrow, aesthetically and conceptually, is really an artifact of the past. Trophy kitchens nowadays, if you look to, say, really high-end companies like Plain English Kitchens in the UK, look sort of like Downton Abbey kitchens. They don't reflect a mid-century aesthetic per se, which is funny because mid-century style is still as popular as ever for all the knockoffs that are available at all the, sort of low, middle, and high-end retailers. But it seems today, probably for a few reasons, there is environmental concern. People want less plastic. And modernism sometimes doesn't age well. Sometimes it tends to kind of look cruddy real fast because the precision with which a kind of a brand new, spotless, mid-century modern building or room, if it starts to develop sort of dings and flaws, it kind of starts to look shabby quicker.
Right.
Whereas a 19th century kitchen just gets better with age. So people who really have money to renovate kitchens are opting for things like brass and marble, wood and carved moldings and detailing like that, and trying to kind of disguise technology. So there's not so much a desire to have lots of gadgets and gizmos very conspicuously displayed, but really to sort of make it look like, oh, there's just, a Chemex drip coffee and that's it. We don't need anything else. We're cool like that.
Well, the kitchens I walk into around Palm Springs during Modernism Week, I notice there are a lot more food-specific appliances. Like you've got...
Instant Pot.
Yeah, you've got built-ins, like the pizza oven.
Yes.
Is big now.
Or a wine fridge. Or
a wine fridge, a cappuccino machine that's built into the wall like a microwave.
Yep.
It's a big machine in there, and it has automatic milking systems.
For all different kinds of milk. And it's genius. Well, and that gets to a really interesting question, which is why did the kitchen of the future, as this fully automated concept, really not ultimately take off in the end? And I think it's because, gourmet or not, people really do kind of like to cook. People do like to customize. You don't necessarily want a machine to do it all for you. It's kind of, it's almost too much work to sort of coordinate all of that. People like to customize and kind of zhuzh their coffee or their food or their breakfast or whatever they're doing.
And you look at all the cooking shows now.
Exactly.
I mean,
Cooking is cool.
How many food channels do we have? It seems
and
like
Netflix is like half of the programming on Netflix is like sort of all these chef profiles all over the world, and it makes you want to experiment and try stuff. And
travel there and buy the ingredients.
Exactly, and experiment with kimchi or whatever.
Yeah, whatever it is.
Yeah, definitely. You don't want a machine to do that. You want to do it.
You want to do it yourself, right? Well, this has been delightful. Thank you so much for stopping by.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been so fun.
Where can people reach you if they want to write and talk about appliances?
I have a website. It's sarah-archer.com.
Okay.
There's an email form on that. And I'm on Instagram at Sarcherize. It's SARCHIZE, like Simonizing, and on Twitter at Sarcher. And I'm always, happy to talk dishwashers or whatever else mid-century is on people's minds.
Okay, super. Thanks so much, Sarah.
Thank you so much.
That was Sarah Archer chatting with George Smart. She's the author of The Midcentury Kitchen. And now, a moment of reflection from Nietzsche.
Beauty, love, durability, designed to last for years to come, bringing you peace and tranquility. You feel relaxed, knowing your house can easily achieve any exterior look and any color. Wood, concrete. Your house loves feeling this good. And you love feeling this good. Nietzsche, 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 Nietzsche. Say it with me. Nietzsche. Advanced engineering. Nietzsche, Nietzsche. Durability, textures, finishes, and colors. Visit Nietzsche.com/USModernist. Nietzsche, Nietzsche, Nietzsche. That's NICH. Wait for it. A look you'll love. Nietzsche.
Ackerman-Shaw established Ackerman Modern and worked with her father, Jerome Ackerman, and Design Within Reach to re-release a collection of iconic Jenev ceramic vessels first produced in 1953, with new pieces produced based on the original plaster molds. She's the author of a 2018 book about her parents, Evelyn and Jerome Ackerman, The House That Love Built.
And so we stayed. So I live in Silicon Valley. I'm like 2.5 miles from Google. So everybody around me is a
Where do you
Google
live?
Mountain View.
Okay.
Is a Google.
I
you
lived
know,
in Palo Alto
app.
for a year in high school.
Well, okay.
My dad taught at Duke.
Yeah.
Took a sabbatical leave in 11th grade for me.
Oh, wow.
And he was at Stanford.
There we go.
And so
what year was that?
71, 70
Okay.
to 71.
I
was a
graduated
long
in
time ago.
82, so.
From Stanford?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I went to Palo Alto Senior High
Yeah,
School.
Pali High.
Pali, yep.
Yeah, Pali High on El Camino. I drive
Yeah.
by it all the
It
time.
was fantastic. And I love the Bay Area.
Yeah, I do too. I really do love it. And it's funny because Mark and I met. Our fathers went to elementary, middle, and high school together and set us up
In
at
LA?
in Detroit. And they set us up
Oh.
at a high school reunion in 1980, and we both went. And then we wound up getting married.
Oh,
It's
really?
hysterical.
So you knew each other back in Detroit?
We didn't, but my dad knew his dad. They were
Oh.
friends. We have a picture of them from 1936 at a Sweet 16 party with my dad and his dad and all these other friends of theirs. Can you believe it? It's hysterical.
Well, tell us about your dad, because this
Okay.
is all new to me.
Oh.
And learning
Okay.
about. Yes, you are. I've been pressed the button already.
Oh, you don't even need me.
Okay.
No, I need you, Tom. But okay.
He has to have a sidekick.
I didn't want to lose all this good material. You know,
Okay.
Okay,
while
I
we
can
were
always say
chatting.
it again. So.
No. We've got it
Okay.
down. All right. So tell me about your parents, because I'm fascinated to know about them now, and I've been tracking them and Googling them and all of this, and you're speaking about them while you're here at Modernism Week.
I am, and I really appreciate it. It's interesting. I think my parents have such a wonderful personal narrative, and when you combine that story with their design work, it makes for such a rich tapestry of information for people. They both grew up in Detroit in the Depression, and they were 4 years apart in age, so they never met, even though they went to the same elementary, middle, and high school.
Oh, they were slightly out of sync.
They were out of sync,
Yeah,
exactly.
yeah.
And so they both wound up going to Wayne University because that was all they could afford. My parents couldn't afford to go to Cranbrook, where Saarinen and Eames and everybody else
Sure.
was just stone's throw away. It was too expensive. And my mom actually started at University of Michigan, but the war broke out. And her brothers all left to go work in the war, and she was called home to her mom. So my parents met once at Michigan, and then my dad left to go work at the Naval Ordnance, and then he became an air control tower operator in Germany after the war. And he came back to Wayne on the GI Bill, like a lot of people post-war did. And he had a friend who said, there's this lovely young woman. You really should meet her. She's working at a design studio. And at the time, my mom was now doing her MFA at Wayne. And my dad was returning to finish his bachelor's. And he walked in, and apparently it was like this movie scene, the way my dad would tell it. A beautiful woman, a fireplace,
The
rich
music
fabrics.
swells.
Yes, exactly.
I love that.
And it was winter. And he had a Milky Way in his pocket, apparently. And he walked in and he said, "Hi, I'm Jerry Ackerman. We have this mutual friend." And she said, "Yes, I'm Evelyn Lipton. We met once a few years ago, and then I never saw you." And he said, "Well, World War II kind of happened." And they started talking. And apparently he said, "Would you like a Milky Way?" And my mom's favorite chocolate was Milky Way. So it's a very cute sort of meet and
it was
pickup
destined in the
line.
stars, so to speak.
Yes. And my dad really was a charming, funny, witty, entertaining person. He was very smart. He sang all the time. And my mom had all these suitors and a guy who wanted to take her to Paris, all this other stuff. And she always told me that she fell in love with my dad the day she met him there. And she would have married him that first day. And until she passed away in 2012, she professed that love daily for him. It's just
That's great.
fantastic.
Oh,
That's the
So-
kind of thing
is
you
your
want.
dad still with us, or is he?
He passed away last year at 99.
All right.
This is his centennial year, which is
Wow.
pretty amazing. So I'm doing some cool things
Yes,
for that.
you are.
tell us about what your mom and dad did. I think that kind of gets us here to Modernism Week.
So
after they got together.
Yeah, so they got married in Detroit, and my dad worked at a steel company for a little bit, and they finished that up, and my dad got a master's of ceramics at Alfred, which is probably still the best ceramics school in the country. And they went in 1949 to an Alexander Gerard exhibition for modern living, and they got exposed to Eames and Vysotsky and Nelson and said, with a very optimistic California kind of can-do spirit, if they can do it, why can't we? And they picked up and they moved to California in 1952. My uncle Bernard was an attorney out here, and he lived in what he called a sleepy little town called Westwood, oddly enough. And they literally put everything in a car and drove across country and started up a ceramic studio that they called Jenev, which was a combination of their first names.
Their names, yes.
Yep, they thought it was very European.
Jerry and Evelyn.
Yes. And they did ceramics. And then they realized that my father producing ceramics was not going to be able to support them making a living. My mom worked for Red Skelton for $1 an hour.
Okay.
Doing what?
Answering fan mail and correcting his scripts because he was a notorious ad-libber. And they were in Culver City, and Red Skelton was in the Culver Hotel, which was partially owned by John Wayne and some other people. Okay. So my mom would do that, and my dad was developing these ceramics, and they sold to Jules Seltzer and Paul McCobb's directional showroom and sort of started hitting the national stage. And then they saw a mosaic exhibit, and my mom said, well, I can do mosaics. And she started designing mosaics. And then they met people who could do tapestry weavings for them. And so they adapted their Bauhaus sensibilities that they'd been exposed to in college and said, you know, it's not a crime to use other methods to produce things so that you can make enough, so that it's sustainable and scalable. And so they turned to craftsmen around the world, in Mexico, Italy, Japan, Greece, and my mom became the primary designer. My dad became the businessman, the entrepreneur, the salesperson, and they built a business of these handcrafted wood carvings, mosaics, tapestries, hardware, metalwork, and had showrooms in LA in the design district, and did that through the early 1980s. And so basically they lived and worked together their entire married lives.
That must have been just amazing for you to watch this as their daughter.
It was a fabulous way to grow up. And I thought it was normal, and everybody else thought it was weird. And my friends thought my house was very strange because it was full of Alexander Gerard-like material, right? It was folk art, it was contemporary furniture, it was Eames and Hans Wegner.
All these objects.
And objects, and my parents' art. And
did that go over well with your friends, or did they think you were kind of, your parents
They
were
thought
kind
it
of
was
weird?
kind of funky, and they didn't like the fact that I didn't really use a lot of crayons. I had colored pencils and X-Acto knives and a dry mount press, and I thought their houses were really ugly. Shag carpeting, avocado green kitchen,
paneling,
lazy boys.
Yeah. The California look of the 70s.
And the best was always the couch and the chair in the living room covered in plastic.
Oh, yes.
Remember those?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, and you try to sit on it, and it was so hot.
Yep. And
or cold.
You stuck to it.
Yeah.
So
and it made noise.
But my house was a fun house to come to. My parents were the cool parents, because they were interested in people, and they were intriguing, and they always engaged with my friends, and my friends all loved them. So it actually was it was a fabulous way to grow up. I was exposed to all sorts of interesting people and places, except for travel. My mom hated flying. So despite all the business relationships around the world, we didn't do that.
But that was up to your dad to go if you were going to go.
He didn't even do that. Everything was by phone or mail.
Oh, really?
There were no faxes. There were no computers. There was no FedEx.
Right, old school.
Very old school.
Yeah.
Do drawings.
Did he have agents?
He had
overseas?
He had friends that would hook him up with workshops. An expat who lived in Mexico,
right.
Or Cheryl Brody, with whom they formed Panel Carve, and then later Cheryl did Forms and Surfaces. Cheryl was in Europe, so Cheryl found somebody who would work on their hardware in Italy for them.
And how has this all evolved into Ackerman Modern?
So somehow I didn't want anything to do with the business after spending my formative years from about age 6 on in their showrooms stamping catalogs.
Typical rebellion, right?
Yeah, and working at trade shows and doing all that and getting to go to like Victor Gruen's office or Gensler's office or Pereira and Luckman. It wasn't so much rebellion. I just wasn't a good enough artist. I'm competent, but I wasn't talented in the way my parents were, and I knew that. And I thought, well, I can manage art, but I could never be the creator of these fabulous things. And so I went off to Stanford, and I majored in English, and I got a master's in English, and was going to go to law school, and all those other things. And then I fell into publishing, and I loved publishing, and I got to manage art and design there in a different way, in editorial. I loved language, and I really didn't think about it. And then somehow in my 50s, and I think a lot of children of designers kind of hit this midlife. It's not a crisis. I wasn't looking for a Porsche. It was more of a realization of, if I didn't become the steward of my parents' legacy, who would? I was the repository of knowledge. I was the person who had lived this.
I don't know what you're talking about here. This is foreign to me completely.
I don't know about that.
Knowing about their designs and what they did. And so I thought, what am I going to do? And I thought, I'm going to start a little company called Ackerman Modern, and I will work on museum exhibitions, and maybe I'll release some products and do some limited editions. And then I got introduced to Design Within Reach, who, of course, I knew about.
Sure.
And my parents, of course, had bought their furniture from Herman Miller in 1949, before there was Design Within Reach. And Design Within Reach reissued a collection of my dad's Jenev ceramics that were designed in 1953. And they've been used in like the Stahl Case 25 house, which is fantastic.
Now, how do you reissue ceramics?
So you ship a bunch of 65-year-old molds and masters to Klein Reed in New York, and they carve new sets of masters, which are then sent to the manufacturing company, who then makes new production molds.
Okay.
So, and lots of them, because I only have a couple, one of each or two of each, and they couldn't withstand production process anymore. No. And so you basically make them true to the original, from the original set. And you match the glazes as best you can with things that are no longer dangerous to human health.
Yes. Because we care about that kind of thing.
Right.
Lead, arsenic, and rare earth metals.
Yes, because back when my dad did those things, of course, that wasn't an issue. So
no, it was safe then.
Yes,
it was delicious.
That's right. But my dad did live till 99, so apparently
there you go. Something went right.
Right.
Ackerman Modern is accessible how now? Is it a website?
So it's ackermanmodern.com online, and you can buy the ceramics through Design Within Reach. And I'm looking to form some other partnerships and in conversations with a few museums to do some more exhibitions.
Oh, great.
More retrospectives, which I think would be really interesting to do again.
And are you here in Palm Springs for a panel? Or?
I'm here because Palm Springs invited me to do an event, and so we're hosting Partners in Design, and it will consist of a panel conversation with Trina Turk, Gerard O'Brien, Dale Carolyn Gluckman, and Joe Loria. Dale and Joe are curators. They're both former LA County Art Museum curators who know my parents well and have curated their work. Gerard is a gallerist who has sold my parents' work for a long time, and Trina is, as you know, a lifestyle brand and fashion icon, and she's loved my parents' work.
Walked by her store last night.
Yeah. As a matter of fact, I am wearing Trina Turk because they insisted that I be appropriately Palm Springs at the show.
Appropriately turked here.
Yes, I'd be appropriately turked. And David Keeps, who is a design journalist, is doing the emceeing. Peter Loffrey was going to do that for us, and Peter's health has not allowed him to travel, so David has kindly stepped in. And then I'm going to talk about Growing Up Modern, which is sort of what I'm talking to you about.
Right. Yes.
Right. And then we have a lovely little movie called In Tandem, produced by Katie Natornis and Margaret Halkin, that they're going to show.
And what is that movie about? I haven't heard of that one.
It's about my parents. So it interviews a number of people in the design field, including Jonathan Adler, who wrote the foreword for the book Hand in Hand about my parents, who said that my folks were part of his inspiration for actually going into business, that he saw people who were designers who could actually make a living. And he thought if they could do it, he could do it. So there you go, pay it forward.
This is sort of, the recurring theme is,
Yep.
if they can do it, I can do it.
Exactly. You
That's
take
where the
inspiration.
inspiration, and goes to the next generation.
Yep. So it's very cool. I think it's wonderful. So I'm really looking forward to it. We're talking at the Annenberg, and given that I was a student body president in high school and I had to lead assemblies of 1,600 unruly teenagers, I think I can manage to talk in front of a much more welcoming crowd.
200 or 300 people, right?
Right.
Yeah. I think it holds 300 or 400. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a lot of people in
Yeah.
that. It's a beautiful hall.
It is. So we have a nice sort of different
So you're going to
group
rev
of
up some
modules.
good school spirit in the talk?
I don't know that I'm going to be doing any cheerleading, but
I think we have some pom-poms out back.
oh
Yeah.
gosh, no, I'd be terrible at that. I'm completely uncoordinated. You wouldn't want me doing it.
Victory. Victory.
That's why you hire dancers.
That's
Yeah.
right. That's right.
do it
I'm
for
gonna have the Beyonce backup dancers, and we'll be
you
all
go.
set.
That will be great. You know, we had the other day here Susan Sarnan and Celia Bartoya and
Carla Hartman
Carla-
from Daughters of Design.
and Carla Hartman from Daughters of Design. And I told them that they needed to print out some T-shirts that were like rock and roll tour T-shirts.
Yes.
Because they do go on the road with each other
They do.
every now and then.
They do, and they have a fan base. And I actually, Celia and I talked a long time ago about how could I reissue a pendant my mother designed in college. And she had reissued some of Harry's
Yeah.
jewelry, and she was wonderfully helpful to me. And I went to the presentation the other day, and I finally got to meet her in person. And I had met Carla before because my parents knew the Eames family.
Sure.
And so I'd met Carla, and
Name
they
droppers.
knew Eames Demetrius. Well, they grew up in my parents
Yeah.
were in that milieu in the 50s
Right.
and 60s. So.
You know, you could see Eames any moment because he stayed here last night.
Oh,
with
well,
us.
that's perfect because Eames is a doll, and
Yeah.
I love him, but he's always traveling, and I can never get a hold of him. So,
I think he's probably sleeping late. We haven't seen him come down for the delicious bacon.
the bacon. I would like bacon on my bacon, please.
Yes. That's what we say every
There-
time we come.
There was a restaurant in San Francisco called Bacon Bacon, and from appetizer to dessert, everything had bacon in it.
Oh, yeah. We had one of those in Philadelphia,
There you go.
and they had bacon ice cream, which was incredible. Just incredible. Like, you would never think that would go together.
Yeah, I guess it's the umami thing of
It's
sweet,
the sweet
savory,
and salt. Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, that's not just mommy's, daddy's too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's that whole getting the fat content right sort
Right.
of thing, you know, because you're trying to balance it off against the pork flavor.
That's right. And it's funny, I'd never met Susan, but Celia had invited me to write an article for Doco Momo US
Yes.
about a year ago. And Susan, Celia, and two other people had written for it. So I feel like I have sort of this band of brothers, or I guess maybe it's a gang of sisters.
Gang of sisters, yeah.
And it's wonderful because the idea of being an offspring of this age, of these kinds of parents, and of course their parents are much more iconic than mine and better known, but I did ask them a question at the end of the presentation, and I said, what was your aha moment when you moved from being a daughter of to a steward of? And it was they had really articulate, interesting answers, and I really,
That's
really,
a great question.
really enjoyed that. It was a wonderful presentation. I'm so glad I made it.
Well, Laura, thank you so much for coming and visiting with us.
It's fabulous. I appreciate you having me.
And your husband is just next door eating the bacon.
Eating
so
bacon.
I think he will be fine.
Yeah.
He's real happy
No
with
ice
the visit.
cream, but just bacon.
Just bacon.
Yep.
And we hope to run into you again soon.
I'm looking forward to it, and I really appreciate you inviting me. It was an absolute pleasure.
You've been listening to Laura Ackerman-Shaw, author of Evelyn and Jerome Ackerman, The House That Love Built, chatting with George Smart. Learn more about her at ackermanmodern.com. Thanks for listening. Stay tuned as we bring more shows from 2020's Modernism Week in Palm Springs. Hey, you want to hang out with us at the swanky US Modernist compound at Modernism Week next year, February 2021? Email george at usmodernist.org. US Modernist Radio is underwritten by Nichiha.com/USModernist and by Angela Roll, your special agent for Modernist houses, 919-995-0550. All right, George, take us out.
Visit USModernist.org's massive archives to listen to past shows, discover documentation of 7,000 plus significant modernist houses, and access 2.8 million pages of classic 20th century architecture magazines. US Modernist Radio is produced by Soundtracks Recording Studio in Raleigh, North Carolina. Our theme song was performed by me and Robinson Earl. Carrie Cesarino researches guests while juggling 2 children, a bowling ball, and a chainsaw, all while salsa dancing with husband Adam. US Modernist Radio is a production of Modernist Archive, a nonprofit educational archive for the documentation, preservation, and promotion of modernist residential design. I'm George Smart, and are the stars out tonight? There's no Frank Sinatra tune that doesn't pair with a visit to Frank's pool in Palm Springs, something we are privileged to experience every year at Modernism Week. We'll be back soon with another All I Do Is Dream of You. As time goes by, I've got you under my skin edition of US Modernist Radio. Cheers.
We're swinging.
We are.